and welcome back to Context for Kids, Gospel Studies number 11, The Sons of Herod. Kind of sounds like a horror movie, right? Dun dun dun, the Sons of Herod. Well, for a lot of people it was like a horror story. As a matter of fact, it was just like part 3, you know, part 1, the Hasmonean priest kings, and the part 2, Herod the king, and then part 3, his kids. And like the last 2, you know, that were rated solid PG/PG-13 because of violence and horrible things, you know, this one too. So get your parents' permission, and then, or get them to join you, and better yet, and then come back and watch, and I'll be here waiting. Okay, so welcome back. All right, so you probably, maybe you've noticed, I know a lot of you guys contact me and you talk to me about my shirts. This is the 3rd week in a row I'm wearing a Darth Vader shirt. This one, however, is covered with evil cat hair from my husband's evil cat. You may not be able to see this one because it's all very dark. But why am I wearing Darth Vader shirts? Well, because this was the time of the evil empire, the Roman Empire. and it was a very, very difficult time, you know, and we've spent the last 2 weeks kind of talking about the time before the Romans and the time of the beginning of the Romans here. Now we're going to be solidly into the New Testament. We're going to be talking about it, like 5 or 6 different people that actually appear in the New Testament accounts, and you have to know which one is which. And if you don't, it's kind of confusing. You always think, Herod, same guy. No, there were many Herods. As a matter of fact, there were 3 generations of guys named Herod. You got to know which one's which, and it really does make a difference. Okay, so here we go. The Sons of Herod. And this is going to cover the time from his death in 4 BCE to 44 of the Common Era. So this is going to cover almost the entire life of Yeshua, or Jesus as he's also known. Because we know from Matthew chapter 2 that Yeshua was born right before the death of Herod. Or sometime before the death of Herod, because Herod was still alive. Herod the Great Herod the original, was still alive when he was born, and they had to get out of the country. Why? Because Herod had found out that the King of the Jews was born, and he was going to send out his troops to slaughter babies, and that's called the slaughter of the innocents. But this week is not about that. This week is about the sons of Herod, because when he died, well, let's go to this little genealogical chart, and if you go onto www.contextforkids.com and go to the blog, The Sons of Herod, you'll see a link in that blog to this, which I didn't make up, which I got from another ministry, but they did a really good job, and it's a nice clean one and easy. So these are the rulers of Israel descended from Herod. Well, not all the rulers. That's Aristobulus right there. He was one of Herod's sons that he killed in 7 BCE, of course. But we've got, when Herod died, he left his sons his lands. And of course, he couldn't really do that because the lands actually belonged to Rome. They'd only allowed Herod to rule over them. Remember, they gave him the kingship because of the fighting of Aristobulus II and John Hyrcanus II. And they said, we've had enough of these Hasmonean guys. We're going to give it to this guy who's the son of the guy who's always been really loyal to us. So here we've got Archelaus, Herod Antipas, and Philip. So, and we've also got 2 other rulers. We're going to talk about Herod Agrippa I and Herod Agrippa II. All of these guys, including one other, are mentioned in the Bible. She is mentioned in the Bible too. His wife is mentioned in the Bible. She's mentioned in the Bible too. Oh my goodness, you know, all these guys. So strap yourselves in, and again, like the last one, you may not completely get it because there are a lot of people and they're related in a lot of different ways, but it just kind of gives you an idea of how incredibly complex the political situation was when Yeshua was ministering. All right, so at the death of Herod, Rome divided Israel between the surviving sons of Queen Malthace of Samaria and Cleopatra. Not that Cleopatra, Cleopatra of Jerusalem. You know, it was a funky name. People liked it, I guess. It was kind of popular. Now, Herod's number one heir, and it was only decided like just a short time before his death because he originally had another Herod entirely, Herod II, to be his prime heir, but then he kind of fell out of favor, and of course his firstborn son Antipater was assassinated just a few days before he died. By him, he had him killed for treason. And actually, he did have it kind of coming. But we don't like to assassinate people. Don't listen to Miss Tyler when she said he had it coming. Don't go out and assassinate people just because you think they had it coming. But when it's talking about Herod's family, they were a bunch of really evil people. Except we'll talk about one that's not so bad today. All right, so we've got Archelaus. Archelaus became, well, actually, Herod wanted him to be a king. And he said, okay, I want him to carry forth my kingship. I want to give him Judea, Idumea, Samaria, Caesarea, which was a great seaport that he had built. We talked about that last week. And Sebaste. Sebaste was when Herod rebuilt the capital of Samaria. He built it as a completely Hellenized city, and he named it Sebaste. So that's what that was. That was a capital city of the region of Samaria. Just like the capital city of Judea was Jerusalem, and we don't know what the capital city of Idumea is. Scholars aren't sure. There's some debate about what it was because it doesn't really talk about it in the historical writings. None that I've come across anyway. Oh, ignore my husband's evil cat who is now trying to scratch her way through the door. All right. Now his two other sons, Antipas, he was made the Tetrarch of Galilee and Perea. Remember, Galilee's in the north. Perea is across the Jordan from Judea. And I'm going to put up maps and you can see these areas. I'm going to circle them when I get to them. And then Herod Philip was made the Tetrarch of all the other outlying regions. And actually, you know what? That's wrong. It's not Herod Philip. I messed up my PowerPoint. Different guy entirely. So we're just going to call him Philip the Tetrarch. Tyler made a mistake. Get used to it. Actually, if you've been watching all this time, you're so used to it, you're just chuckling to yourself right now. She did it again. All right. So I mentioned the words Ethnarch because instead of making him a king, Rome made him an Ethnarch, and we've got Tetrarchs. So what's the difference between an Ethnarch and a Tetrarch? Well, an Ethnarch is like a governor. Nehemiah, when he was brought back from exile and he came and operated as the governor of Judea, which was a very small region during the Babylonian, or during the time of the Medes and the Persians, he just was the governor. It's a leader of an ethnic group. That's why they call it an Ethnarch, okay? But it's not a king. But you're a governor of a province or a people group. And so Archelaus was made Ethnarch. Now a Tetrarch is a ruler over 1/4 of a province. How do you remember that? Because it's Tetrarch. Tetra is 4. Okay? Tetra, 4. So the one son got pretty much half of Herod, his father's holdings, and 2 other sons got a quarter. Now there were other sons, they just got totally snubbed. Okay, now the Hasmoneans, from the original Maccabeans to John Hyrcanus I, they only ruled as high priest and ethnarch / governor. Okay, they were just the leader of a people group. From Aristobulus I to Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II, they reigned as kings and high priests in defiance of Torah laws. And to that I will also add, which I didn't put here, Antigonus III. So he also, when he was the one that got Herod on the run, if you remember. He's the guy who launched the revolt. And he was the last. He was the last of the Hasmoneans, because the Roman had enough of that. Those guys were just nothing but trouble. They were just as bad as pagans in the way they treated people, and especially their own family members. Remember, power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. And I can't for the life of me remember who said that at this moment, but you know what? It's pretty darn true. All right, so let's talk about the high priest during these years. During Herod's early years, the high priests were usually relatives by marriage, and he did that in order to enhance his own status. Now remember, the first high priest that he brought in, I think his name was Archelaus. Now he was a Babylonian Jew. Okay, he was from the priestly line of Aaron, but he was from a family that had been living in Babylon. Herod brought him in because he didn't want any of the Hasmoneans to really deal with. Because when you had a Hasmonean high priest, well, in the minds of some of the people, he would also, and especially in the minds of the Hasmonean, he would also have kind of a claim on the kingship, and he might be the focus for revolutions. Because they go, that other guy there, he's one of us. And Herod, his grandpa just converted, and he's an Idumean, and he's not even a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and he's a latecomer, and he's an interloper, and let's get one of our own, because that worked so well for so long during the time of the Hasmonean priest kings. No, I didn't. We know that. So anyway, he brought in this guy, but then his wife Miriam, who he later killed, and her mother Alexandra convinced Herod to depose that high priest, at least he didn't end up dead, and put in her 17-year-old brother as high priest. Well, he was so beloved by the people that Herod saw the writing on the wall, and he had him drowned in the family pool during a party. Yep, what a guy. So then he brought Alcimus did I say Alcimus the last time? Alcimus was totally wrong. He was another high priest from way before. Archelaus, I believe, is the name of the guy. So he brought back Archelaus the Babylonian for a while, until time came and he promoted the father of one of his other wives, Miriam II, after Miriam I was killed by Herod. You know, the only thing more dangerous than being one of Herod's kids is being one of Herod's relatives by marriage. Dang. Okay. So, in later years and under his sons and the Roman governors, the priesthood was for sale to the highest bidder. Under his son Archelaus, he was just appointing who he wanted. But the Roman governors and procurators that we're going to talk about next week, that were over Judea, they were actually selling the high priesthood to the highest bidder. They were making sure that the guy was actually from the priestly line, but it was a power game, and it pretty much went to one family for almost the entire time from 6 of the Common Era to 70 when the temple was destroyed. But we'll talk about that later, not now. All right, so here we have this again. We're going to talk about this guy, Herod Archelaus. And we see him popping up in Matthew chapter 2, which is why we're doing this. He was actually the son of Malchus the Samaritan. So this guy was actually genetically not even remotely Jewish. Yeah, pretty much at all, because Herod's father was an Idumean, his mother was an Arab, and then so he married a Samaritan, and the Samaritans were hated by the Jews, and we'll talk about why in a future teaching. He was made the Ethnarch of Judea, Samaria, Idumea, and Caesarea from 4 BCE to 6 CE. Well, that's only 10 years. Did he die? No, he was just so bad that the Romans actually got rid of him. I mean, they had like delegations from the Jews go to Augustus and say, please get rid of this guy. We would rather be ruled directly by Rome than this guy. This guy was a nightmare. This is why the angel told Joseph in the dream, do not go back to Bethlehem. Even though Herod was dead at this point, which is why he was told to go back to Israel, do not go back to Judea, to Bethlehem, because his son Archelaus is in power. And Archelaus was cut from the same fabric as his dad, but he didn't have the wisdom required to rule. He wasn't as good as his dad in his dad's strengths, but he was just as bad as his dad in his dad's weaknesses. So, oh, bad guy, bad guy, bad guy. As soon as he came to the throne, he was responsible for a massacre of Jews at Passover. And if you want to study that, I recommended this one last time. These books, A History of the Jewish People in the Time of Jesus Christ. It's written by a guy named Schur. It is excellent. Unfortunately, a lot of times when he's just going through, he'll just put a Greek phrase in and he won't translate it. But, you know, you can get the gist of what he's talking about. He wrote for scholars 130 years ago. He wasn't expecting anyone who didn't know how to read Greek to be reading his book. Well, I don't read Greek. I bet you don't either. But maybe you will someday, you know. Someday you could know a lot more than me, and actually I hope that you'll all go on to learn a lot more than me. Oh, okay, so yeah, he did a massacre at Passover. Bad mojo. And he was deposed in 6 of the common area by Augustus. And when Rome removes you, you know that you're messed up. Okay, and they replaced him by the governors. Okay, so next week, that's where we're going to see why we have people like Hippolytus, Pontius Pilate, Festus, different people in control of Judea. And never again, well, no, that's not true. There will be a son of Herod that's given control of it. Later we'll talk about that. But only for like 3 years. Okay, so now we're going to go to Herod Antipas. And he was also the son of Malchus, the Samaritan. So he is the full-blooded brother of Herod Archelaus. Now Herod Antipas, he was actually Tetrarch of Galilee in the north, and Perea, that's across the Jordan from Judea, from 4 BCE to 39 Common Era, which means pretty much he was in charge of the area where Yeshua, Jesus, lived and grew up for his entire life. Okay? You can imagine he was a better guy than Archelaus, because everyone was. And I mean, he actually ruled for 43 years. But this was a bad guy. Yeshua actually this is the guy that Yeshua called him, that fox. And you don't see Yeshua insulting many people. Okay? He saved it up. He wasn't like one of these people who just spewed out insults all over the place. He called him that fox. This was the guy who had John the Baptist beheaded. And he was the one that when Pontius Pilate was wanting to pass the buck, he sent Yeshua to Herod Antipas on the day that he was crucified. You know, well, he lives in your area. And to Herod Antipas's credit, he said, I can't find anything wrong with the guy. He did mock him and all that stuff. But this is an interesting story here. Okay, Herod Antipas, the most famous thing that we see about him, we see it in Matthew 14 and Mark 6. We see that the Bible says he was celebrating his birthday. Well, that's probably a bad translation. He was probably celebrating the anniversary of his coming to the throne, because people didn't care about birthdays back then, pretty much. They just didn't. As a matter of fact, the only people's birthdays they would ever celebrate that I know of were dead Roman emperors, because they worshipped them as gods, and the day of their birth was the day when they were revered. But otherwise, birthdays weren't really a thing for quite a long time. So they think that he was celebrating the anniversary of the day that he came to the throne, i.e. Daddy's death, because everybody has felt loads of loving feelings for Herod the Great. He had his wife Herodias, her daughter Salome, by her other husband, had danced for Herod. And Herod was so pleased that she had danced so well in front of her guests that he said, I'll give you anything that you want, ask for it. She went to her mother, Herodias, and she said, well, what should I ask for? She says, the head of John the Baptist on the platter. And so Herod immediately regretted it, but he had to keep his word because he'd given his word in front of all his party guests. Honor and shame. If you've read it, you understand. Or you may not understand, but you get it. And we're going to talk about Herodias on the next slide. That was the wife of Herod Antipas. He was the builder of Tiberias. He actually built this city in honor of Tiberius Caesar. He built it on top of an old graveyard. Jews wouldn't live there because you can get corpse impurity from being in the same locale as a corpse, so they kept them outside the city limits. So he had to settle it with Gentiles, and it was a thoroughly pagan city. Let's see, so I think the city Tiberias shows up in the Bible, but I can't remember. Okay, in Luke 3 and Acts 13, he is the one referred to in the Bible when they talk about Herod the Tetrarch, Herod Antipas, not Herod Archelaus, who is out of the picture after Matthew 2. We don't see him again. So when we are dealing with Matthew 14, Mark 6, Luke 3, when we're dealing with Yeshua's crucifixion, we're dealing with this guy, Herod Antipas. Okay. Hey guys, I was editing this week's video and I completely forgot to mention one of the most important things to understand about Herod Antipas. In the Bible, in every translation I can think of, Herod Antipas is called King Herod. But see, there's a problem with that translation. That Greek word is actually Basilius. And that can mean anything from ruler to the emperor, like the Caesars. Well, that's a big kind of, ground to cover with just the word Basilius. And so when the Bible translators translate it as king, that's not right. You see, if you were a vassal ruler for Rome, which all of the sons of Herod and grandsons and great-grandsons were, you couldn't be called king unless Rome gave you permission in the Senate to be called king. They had to make you king. They could make you could be a ruler, you could be Ethnarch, Tetrarch, whatever. But those titles, governor, procurator, prefect, those were determined by Rome, what you would be called, and a lot of times it depended on your rank. Whether you were senatorial class, equestrian class, just a Roman citizen, whatever. But Herod was not a king. He was a Basilius. He was a tetrarch. So just keep that in mind when you're reading King Herod. I know Tyler makes a lot of mistakes, right? Miss Tyler makes a lot of mistakes. But this actually wasn't one of them. I just forgot to mention it when I was recording the teaching. So King Herod, king? No. As a matter of fact, from the time that Herod died in 4 BCE until King Agrippa was made king by Roman Emperor Caligula in 41 CE, there was no king of the Jews except Caesar. No human king anyway. That's going to make reading the Bible make a lot more, certain things are going to get interesting when we read the phrase King of the Jews in relationship to Yeshua, knowing that there really weren't any other contenders at that point except for Caesar. Here we go. All right. Okay, so now we have Herod the second, the son that got totally dissed. He was the son of Mariamne the second. And he got no inheritance. I'm sure he got inheritance, but he got no like tetrarchship, no ethnarchship, whatever you want to call him. Herod the second was the son of Mariamne the second, and he was the original husband of Herodias. Now, when they talk about the account with John the Baptist, the reason John the Baptist was put in prison in the first place was because he was telling John that it was unlawful for him to be married to his brother Philip's wife. Well, they're talking about this guy, Herod II, and we know that because of the writings of Josephus, who recorded all of this family drama. So he was the original husband of Herodias. Herod Antipas met her in Rome, as I recall it. Oh, all these guys were completely educated in Rome. These were Roman educated guys. These were Roman citizens, Roman educated. But also I'm going to tell you something, that as far as the religion of Judaism went, they were very, very much more sympathetic to the Jews than the procurators that we're going to talk about next week. Anyway, so it was unlawful for him to marry his brother's wife when they'd gotten divorced, but there'd been a child from the marriage. It made this qualify as incest because it was like two family members marrying because there was a child. You're not allowed to marry once there's a child. I know. It's confusing. So John the Baptist had said, you can't have her. Well, this made Herodias infuriated. And so she got her daughter, Salome, by Herod II to ask for his head on a platter. And John the Baptist was killed by Herod Antipas. Now here's the interesting thing about Herod Antipas, and Josephus talks about John the Baptist a lot. We'll talk about that later. But Herod Antipas suffered a horrible military defeat sometime after the beheading of John the Baptist, which, by the way, was a very disgraceful death. They wanted him to die the most disgraceful because if you read Honor and Shame in the Bible, you know that a man's head is very much tied to his honor. And although of all the kinds of different executions they want, I definitely want it to be beheading instead of being burned or being strangled, or because that was also considered an honorable death, was being strangled. That was the most honorable death, being strangled, because it didn't maim your body. Or being stoned. There was one other. As far as the death penalty, beheading's the best one for me, but as far as you wouldn't want your head removed from your body in honor shame culture. So that was shaming him completely. He suffered a terrible military defeat. And Josephus the historian records that it was the opinion of all the Jews that this happened to him because he had beheaded John the Baptist, who everyone considered to be a prophet and a righteous man. All right, so he was the father of Salome. He's sometimes called Herod Philip in Matt 14. We don't know why, because there's no record of him having the name Philip, but maybe they knew something in that day that we didn't. But then we have Philip the Tetrarch. Okay, Philip the Tetrarch was the son of Herod by Cleopatra of Jerusalem. He was the Tetrarch of a whole bunch of places you've probably never heard of, because I hadn't heard of them. Bantania, Trachonitis, Orontis, and he rebuilt Caesarea Philippi on the Galilee. These are all the lands that are east of the Galilee, on the other side of the Jordan River, that were given to Herod by Rome. These were not originally part of Israel at any time. These were given to him. So, I gotta tell you, Philip the Tetrarch was the best of the bunch. He ruled from 4 BCE to 34 CE, so 38 years. He did marry the woman who asked for John the Baptist's head on the plate. Other than that, I couldn't really find any complaints against him. I mean, as far as notable, like, look at the other guys, right? Okay, so Philip was actually pretty cool dude. All right. Now Salome the first. This is not Salome that was married by Philip the Tetrarch that had John the Baptist's head cut off. This is Salome that we talked about last week. That was Herod the Great's sister that he killed both of her husbands, only one of whom she wanted to have killed. So she was a sister of Herod the Great. She was actually given some coastal cities to rule. And I believe she died around 10 of the Common Era. I didn't write it down, but I believe that's correct. She's the mother of Queen Bernice, who was the mother of Herod Agrippa. Okay, and we see Queen Bernice show up in the Bible. All right, so she is a piece of work too. She was one of those intrigue people who was always getting people in trouble. All right, so now we've covered Archelaus, Herod Antipas, Philip the Tetrarch. See, he's always going to be called Archelaus, Herod the Tetrarch, Philip the Tetrarch for short. All right? And we've talked about Herodias. Herodias was actually the daughter of Aristobulus, one of the sons of Herod, who was killed in 7 BCE with his brother Alexander. So, Herodias was the sister of Herod Agrippa. Herodias first married his uncle Herod II. Then she divorced Herod II and married Herod Antipas. And her daughter married Philip the Tetrarch. Is your head swimming yet? See, I can't even get it out of my mouth. It's so crazy. We're getting towards the end. So now we're going to talk about Herod Agrippa I, who was the son of Aristobulus, son of Mariamne I, who was killed, and he was killed, grandson of Herod the Great. Now, Herod Agrippa actually shows up in extracurricular, I call it, extra-biblical Jewish writings quite a bit. He was the grandson of Herod the Great, like I said, by Mariamne. He was the king of Judea. He was given the kingship. He was very good friends. Actually, he did very well during the reign of the Roman Emperor Caligula. We'll be talking about him and all the other Roman emperors in 2 weeks. So he was king of Judea from 41 to 44 of the Common Era. It says CC instead of CE. Okay. Now he was a very zealous Jew. In Acts 12, he shows up prominently. He is the King Agrippa who killed James. James, the brother of Yeshua, James, the head of the Jerusalem council. He killed him, not to be confused with the James, brother of John, the disciple. And he died horribly, and you get different accounts of how he died and why. Josephus tells a different story than Acts tells, than the rabbinic legends tells. But they all have a story about why he died a horrible death. It's something to really look into. And he also shows up in Mishnah Tractate Bikurim. Now, I can't remember if he actually shows up, because I read it, and I can't remember if he actually shows up in the Mishnah portion or in the Talmudic commentaries. I think he shows up in the actual Mishnah, which would have reflected, absolutely would have reflected actual history. Talks about how he was so zealous for God that he would even carry produce, his own produce, once he got into Jerusalem, up to the temple to be presented at Shavuot, at the Feast of Weeks, Pentecost. Okay? But he was very good to the Jews. He was very loyal to the Jewish religion. But like I said, he died horribly, leaving Herod Agrippa II, who I do not have up, but you can figure out that when someone's son, you don't actually need to see the thing. Now, he was the great-grandson of Herod the Great, through Mariamne, Aristobulus, and Agrippa I. He was given the kingship, so he was also named king. He was given the kingship over Judea and also over Philip the Tetrarch's lands because he had just recently died. In 53 he was given that. He was given Galilee and Perea in 55. So he actually ruled most everything. All right? Now, he was a great friend of the Romans. As a matter of fact, he sided with them during the Jewish revolt that was responsible for the destruction of the temple on top of the Temple Mount and for a large portion of the city beneath. Of course, Jerusalem has never been completely destroyed, but everything that was on top of the Temple Mount in 70 AD was destroyed and actually cast down into the streets below. And talk about a trumpeting stone at one point. That's really cool. They found exactly beneath where it would have been during temple days. Really cool. All right. Agrippa and his sister Bernice appear in Acts 25 and 26. So when you're seeing in Acts 25 and 26, that's this guy who would later collaborate with the Romans during the revolt that went from 66 to 70. Okay? So, I hope that makes sense. All these guys show up, so it's important to know about them. And like I said, you know, I'm going to give, I have a reference list at the end. I'll put that in the blog, but I'll also put it up at the end so you can read it. Hopefully it's not too small to be read. But I want to talk to you about something that might seem a little bit weird for the discipleship moment, but this is really, really important to me. I want to talk to you about being special. Now, you may be saying, I'm not special. Well, yes, you are. You absolutely are. A lot of times we make the mistake. You know, and I know a lot of people even in the ministry, who don't feel like they're special enough, and they go through their entire lives thinking, I've got to accomplish more, I've got to do more. Nothing I do is enough. I'll never be special in the eyes of other people. You know, especially like if you get bullied or, you know, if you get rejected, that kind of stuff. You can go through life feeling that no matter what you do, you can't get over that and you're not special. But I want to tell you that being special isn't reserved for like the pretty girls and the handsome boys and the star athletes and the straight A students and people who like are famous or whatever you think qualifies as special. Because you know, those are the things that the world esteems. Yeah, I'm going to tell you right now, far as me, you know, sometimes I don't feel special because I wasn't able to have babies. You know, when I'm around women, a lot of times they talk about things that make me feel very unspecial, and they're not trying to. But when they talk about being pregnant, when they talk about breastfeeding their babies, when they talk about, yeah, well, those are pretty much the only two. Oh, when they talk about their labor horror stories. Sometimes I feel like they're special, and I'm not, even though that God made a miracle to make me a mom when we adopted our boys. But still, you know, if you feel like specialness is related to your accomplishments, or maybe related to the fact that, you know, you may feel that because you're disabled, that you're not special. Well, I can't have any babies. I'm disabled. You know, I can't do something that women are just supposed to be able to do. You may think that, well, this person's smarter than me, so they're special, and I'm not. This person's more beautiful or handsome or athletic or they can sing better, and I can't. But you know what? I'm betting that when you think those things, you're just not looking at the things that are special about you. Because you can do them, they're normal to you, and you don't think they're special. I've got a lot of special things about me. You've got a lot of special things about you. I can't let the unspecial things about me make the things that are special about me mean nothing, because I have gifts from God, and so do you. You know, I was talking to somebody yesterday, And she has a sister who is a very, very high up official in the government of India. Well, she was born with this terrible disease and she's been in a wheelchair all her life. And she's special. She's amazing. She did all these things, even though a lot of people looked at her and said, well, you're not special. Well, yeah, she is. And you know, you don't have to be a high-ranking government official to be special. Maybe you're just going to be a mom or a really great dad. Maybe you're going to be, you know, the best employee in your company. Maybe you're going to be the nicest neighbor in your neighborhood. Maybe you're going to be a really good cook. Maybe you're going to be good musically. Maybe you're just going to be the kind of person that God's going to use to spread His word, just because people are going to want to be like you. They're going to see that there's something different about you. But whatever it is that God has created you to be, when you're doing that, I want you to know that not only are you special, but you're beautiful. Because God looks at things differently than we do. And we look and we have all the wrong standards. You know, we think that maybe the minister in charge or the rabbi or the religious leader is the most special person in the community. But that's not true. They're just different. They've just got a different calling. Sometimes people want titles to make them more special, but that doesn't make you more special. What makes you special is when you take the gifts that God gives you, no matter what they are and no matter how unimportant you think they are, and when you live and you're grateful for them and you acknowledge God in them, you're special. You've probably got a gift that a lot of people wish they had, or a gift that, you know, the people around the people wish that they had, because it's no fun living around a person who's incredibly beautiful or incredibly athletic or incredibly musical or incredibly powerful, incredibly this and that, if they're not acting like Yeshua, like Jesus. So you know what? Spend your life learning to act like Yeshua, like Jesus. And when you do, well, there's nothing more special than that in the world. And so every day you have a chance to become more and more special by acting more and more like Him. And you're going to fail sometimes. That's okay. You just keep trying. You keep trying to be like Him, like our Savior, like our Messiah. You'll never get there. You'll never be perfect. But every day you can be more special. Well, so that's it for the discipleship moment. And you know what? Thank you for joining me this week. And I hope you learned something. And I love you. I'm praying for you. And I hope you have a wonderful week studying the Scripture together as a family. And I'll see you next week to study the procurators. And yes, we're going to talk about the big PP, Pontius Pilate. And I'll try and find another Darth Vader shirt because he deserves it. Take care.